if you had to sum up sort of the mission of this Inflation Reduction Act, how would you describe it to someone that's new to the table or new to this topic to help them understand it?
The piece that we're talking about is one subset of a much bigger program, but this is $8.8 billion that's targeted to go to all of the states and the tribes. And that money is meant to pass through to low and moderate income households as an instant discount.
Welcome into the Independent Thinking Podcast. This is your host, Rob Stott. We've had a couple of updates over the last few months, maybe a little more than a year, around the Inflation Reduction Act, the IRA Act, and everything that means for the independent retail channel, and lots of updates. I will share the links underneath if you're watching the video version of this, or on our website, or streaming this. Links will be in the description to those previous episodes covering this topic, so that you can catch up if you need to, but or if you maybe just want to go back and listen and see how things have progressed over the past year or so around this topic. But to bring you quickly up to speed, a portion of the Inflation Reduction Act has to do with credits for certain individuals that qualify on a whole bunch of product, some of which fall into categories that our independent retailers sell, and whether it's heat pump water heaters or heat pump dryers and washers and things like that. So lots of opportunity for both the retailer and the consumer around these products and around this act. So lots to still be uncovered and learn from as we have these conversations with Frank Sandtner, our in-house expert on the Inflation Reduction Act. And what we're finding over time as we continue to have these updates is that there's so much to be determined and figure out, state by state, really, as individual states determine how they want to approach the credits within the act and what it allows, and all sorts of information like that. So that's what Frank's been hard at work trying to understand and get his hands around, and we finally have our first glimpse, as Frank shares with us this time around, as to how states might approach these rebates and credits and things like that. So lots to, like I said, dive into and continue to learn from and figure out, and that's why we continue to tap into Frank and his immense amount of knowledge around this Inflation Reduction Act. So happy to have him back on and dive into it. So let's just do it. This is Frank Sandtner of Nationwide Marketing Group here on the Independent Thinking Podcast. All right, we are back on the Independent Thinking Podcast, and man, I hope you're watching the video version because the smile's infectious. And I'm talking about you, Mr. Frank Sandtner. Appreciate you jumping on, our Senior Director of Business and Financial Services at Nationwide Marketing Group. How are you, sir?
First, I just want to say you're too kind. But secondly, I'm doing great. A lot of things going on, and prime time coming up, so I'm super excited.
A lot to dive into, and I want to give you the chance. I don't know if we've done this on. You might be the most tenured veteran, other than myself, obviously, of this podcast. The number of conversations we'd had over time, and I don't know. Have I given you the chance? Even if I have, we probably have some new listeners to this podcast, and this may be the first episode they're listening to. So I want to give them the chance to learn a little bit about you. Tell us, for those out there listening, a little bit about your role and who you are and what you do here at Nationwide.
Sure. Well, I've been at Nationwide for 15 years, so I definitely am a veteran as far as that's concerned. Hopefully the same thing with the number of podcasts I've done. And I have a real strong passion for sharing information, especially information that could help anybody, whether it helps them with their business, helps them with their life, just something that could make an impact on people. I feel like the topic that we're going to talk about, the Inflation Reduction Act, is really targeted at changing the lives of low and moderate income households, and that makes my heart bleed. Anything that can help people that are in need is an area that I'm interested in. In fact, the entire Energy Star program is something that used to be run by Rick Weinberg, and then he retired. And I thought, this is going to be something I'll just spend a little bit of time on. But it's really drawn me in because it is so touching, just the level of of concern that people have with not just low and moderate income households, but also with the environment,
Yep.
sustainability. And these things are important. I mean, there's no question about
So
that. The world,
you're getting the sense of how he got sucked in and it was something he became so passionate about. It's clearly now happening with you. Is that what I'm hearing?
yes, pull me back, pull me
Yeah.
back.
No, that's awesome. Another word I'd add too to that list to describe you, determined, right? You'd have to be to cover a story that's been going on as long as this one has with the Inflation Reduction Act and all the updates and just, making sure not even just the updates and staying up to date yourself on what's going on, but taking that information, sharing it with independent retailers in this channel to make sure our channel's up to date, and then also making sure that we have a seat at the table. I will have to, if this is your first episode listening, we'll make sure the links are below that you can go listen to the previous episodes because, I mean, a lot of what you've been doing is making sure that the voice of this channel is heard at these meetings with EPA and Department of Energy and everyone else involved in making this program possible.
Yes, in fact, the Inflation Reduction Act was designed by the Department of Energy to really work through the national retail channels, basically the big box stores, all of the workflows that they created, the software that they built, this national rebate system was all with national retail in mind, not with independent retail in mind. Thankfully, there is a God out there, and the individual states have come back the other way. So most of the states have voiced a very strong interest in involving independent retail. In fact, when they looked at the workflows that I was just describing that were designed for the big box stores, they came back and said, what about independent retail? Independent retail doesn't seem to be represented here. And so when I've gone to the organization that's running this program, there's a lady named Karen Zelmar. She's based in California, and I've gone to her multiple times and reminded her that these programs have got to have workflows that can work for independent retail. And at first, she just sort of heard me out and gave me a generic answer. But now clearly other people have gotten to her. Some of these states have gotten to her and said, you know what? We really do want independent retail. I was a panelist at the annual Energy Star meeting in September in Atlanta and was able to be on stage and voice that. And there were a bunch of state energy officials in the audience. So I'm sure a bunch of those went back to Karen Zelmar and said, you know what? If this thing is not designed to handle independent retail, you're going to have to go back and make some changes.
Yeah, I bet you were a pretty in-demand person in that room after that panel.
Yes, yes. I meet several of these state energy officials, and it was really illuminating because it's like a whole different world in what they
Yeah.
do than anything that I've seen. They throw around acronyms as if I'm going to know what they are. So because of the focus on low income, they use this terminology CBOs, like they use CBOs all over the place. And I didn't even know what a CBO was. So it's a community-based organization. And and when I told them that I didn't even know what it was, they thought I had, three eyes or something because they couldn't believe there's
What?
anybody who doesn't know what CBOs are. But I didn't know
We
what
should
they
have
were.
thrown VIRs and I don't even know what back at them. Just
Maybe what that was.
we all got our
Exactly.
own language. It's just
Correct.
having to learn a little bit, right? No, awesome that you're there able to do that on behalf of this channel. And again, knowing that this might be the first episode that someone's listening to about this topic, what I know it's something you mentioned it too, right? It started, it was supposed to be a simple program, and there's a lot that's kind of developed over time around it. But if you had to sum up sort of the mission of this Inflation Reduction Act, how would you describe it to someone that's new to the table or new to this topic to help them understand it?
So the Department of Energy set aside what a bunch of money for this Inflation Reduction Act. The piece that we're talking about is one subset of a much bigger program. So there's a federal program for inflation reduction, and those are federal tax credits that are much expect to be a whole lot more money there. But this is $8.8 billion that's targeted to go to all of the states and the tribes And that money is meant to pass through to low and moderate income households as an instant discount. So basically, somebody buys an Energy Star qualified product that in that state is part of the program, and they would get that discount. And these are significant discounts. So just to kind of give you a sense, you buy a heat pump dryer and you're a low income household, you would get an $840 instant savings on the product. And then if you go on the other extreme, you buy an HVAC unit and you're low income, you get $6,000 off. So
Wow.
these are so significant, these instant savings. You can imagine how if there are opportunities for fraud, somebody's going to find a way to take advantage of the
Right.
program. And that's why there's so much focus on controls to make sure that there isn't any abuse.
Right. And that you mentioned it, right? It goes to the state level and making sure. I imagine when we say systems, obviously we're talking like software at point of sale type stuff to make sure there's a couple ends to it, right? So the customer gonna have to be approved for something like this. So making sure that those kind of, I don't call them loopholes, but like the checkpoints at which something could happen are safe and secure. But then also to process it, right, as a retailer to accept that credit, like what, and maybe I'm oversimplifying, but is that about right? Am I tracking? Am I sounding like a Frank Sandtner level expert on this topic as I talk?
You're starting to.
Starting to.
It starts off with
Yeah.
there's an there's a qualification for a
Right.
household, and that has to do with household income. Income not in an absolute sense, but relative to the
Mhm.
income in the area.
Yep.
So there's a calculation that has to be done, and the expectation is that the customer would self-qualify because they would do the steps in this federal rebate system to qualify based on their income in their household. Then once they get qualified, the idea is that then they would figure out what product they want to buy. And then the system would say, based on everything else you told me and this product, here's what the incentive is going to be for you. Now, if the retailer sells a product that actually is not qualified because they don't have the right information, which is these get complicated,
Yeah.
then they would not get, and they pass that savings to the consumer, then they would not be able to get reimbursed by the state. So it's things like that is where we know that there's a lot of clarity needed, and we're trying to make sure that we address from our perspective, our retailers have to know how the program works.
Right.
They have to understand what software, as you said, is available to help make this all happen. And then we have to make sure that our manufacturing partners are right there with us,
Right.
right? I had a call with one of our manufacturers just yesterday, and they were concerned that they didn't know how much product to stock because they thought that when the program launches, this thing is going to take off like crazy and everybody's going to be out of stock. And because they were talking about a program that happened back in 2008 where that was the case. And I let them know that, yeah, but the income qualification and some of the other restrictions in how this works is going to dampen the demand significantly. Not only will it dampen the demand, but it's not going to be the same dampening in each state because each state will have some differences to their program, and
Right.
those differences will create certain scenarios. Like,
Well,
let me give you,
yeah, go for
I'll
it. No, go ahead.
give you an example.
Hmm.
Uh, this is in New York State. So New York State is the only state at this point that has been approved. So the plan that they submitted to DOE has been approved and they're ready to rock and roll. Well, they were nice enough to invite some retailers and Nationwide Marketing Group to be on a panel to talk about, our thoughts about the way they were setting their program up. So they reviewed how their program is being set up. We had the information in
Hmm.
advance, but for everybody else in the audience. And then they asked for our input. And one of the things in the way that they've got it set up is that they are incentivizing induction cooking, but only if it involves fuel switching. Okay, so the
Gotcha.
customer had to do fuel
Has
switching
to
from
move from
gas
gas
to
to electric.
electric to qualify.
Right.
Well, in order to make that happen in most households, you're going to need an electrician. So it's not just so the retailer could deliver the product, but then an electrician has to go out and make sure that there's enough power to run the induction cooking product. And so that means the retailer is probably not going to be the last person there.
Right.
Somebody else is going to be the last person there before the credit gets approved to go to the retailer. So basically the retailer gave the discount, the $840 to the consumer right away.
Huh.
Now they're waiting to get their $840 back from the state of New
Right.
York. But they see that, okay, so the state of New York is requiring fuel switching, which means an electrician has to go there, which is a third party. It's not part of the retailers. Our retailers are not electricians. So some licensed electrician goes in there. Then they have to do take certain steps to prove that this product was installed in this house to close the sale, to close the qualification for the rebate. Well, the retailers are like, huh? That sounds like there's a lot more work that I'm not directly involved in, and I'm at risk that I may never get reimbursed. So when you start to look at the individual programs and the ins and outs of them and the hoops that somebody has to jump through, we're going to see my belief and strong expectation is many of the programs will have so many controls in them that they're not going to take off. There's not going to be participation by the distributors or retailers. And then when it doesn't take off, a year later, they're going to have to go back and change the rules a little bit because it's not taken off. Similar to the whole program in and of itself.
Right.
When the DOE put out their application to the states, and the application was 100 pages long, most states said, I don't have
Not
anybody
jump at
to,
that. Yeah.
yeah, I can't do this. So
Right.
the DOE has had to inject money, inject resources, all of this stuff into the states to get them to even apply for this thing.
There's a whole separate government conversation to be had there.
Yes. Yeah.
However, what I want to point out is that the example you just gave, to boil it down and show you just how convoluted it sounds like it's going to get, and I say going to get it, it already is, right? But just it feels like we're at the tip of the iceberg. That's just one state. Like this is just one state whose application has been approved. I know you mentioned the last time we talked, and that state being New York, 4 states had applied. New York, it was like New York, California, maybe Hawaii, and somewhere else,
New
New
Mexico,
Mexico.
and
Um,
It
no,
wasn't California, but California was more recent, but there were
okay.
four.
But so 4 had applied, so 1's now approved. We're still only at 17, I think you said was the number that have applied.
Yeah, 17 states have now applied. They're mainly on the West Coast. Everybody's now applied through to including Arizona and kind of
Yep.
states up there. Then there's a whole bunch in the upper Midwest, kind of the Minnesota, Michigan, Wisconsin,
Mhm.
that area, including Indiana. And then there's a bunch in the Northeast, including Massachusetts,
Yep.
Rhode Island, New Hampshire, I think has applied. So there's several there and New York. And then there's actually one almost an outlier in the Southeast. Georgia has applied.
Wow.
So there's
It,
nobody else around Georgia that's applied except Georgia.
but is there something to that? Like the fact that within an area, do you think those state energy departments are talking to one another?
They're definitely talking to each other. I mean, all of this kind of meets. There's an organization called NASEO, the
Yep.
National Association of State Energy Officials. David Terry runs that, and they bring those people together. Also, the states that have applied are states that already have other energy efficiency programs. They generally have a bigger staff
Yep.
to be able to accommodate something like this, and so you're going to see the states that haven't applied yet. Some of these states have state energy offices with less than 10 people.
Wow.
So when they got that 100-page application, you can
Like,
imagine
sorry. Yeah.
there's nobody to do that. And but the DOE is taking the initiative to group about 4 or 5 states together and help them create their applications.
Gotcha. Gotcha. Quick plug too. You mentioned Mr. Terry. A couple of episodes ago, we could plug his podcast. He was on this. this here podcast talking about, NASEO and what they're doing, and a little bit about this, um, this Inflation Reduction Act and the conversations you've had with them, right? I think he was one of your early points of contact as far as getting in touch with those state level programs with, bringing the independent retail voice to what they're doing and their efforts.
Yeah, there otherwise would be no way to find the state energy officials.
Yeah.
It's a different department in every state, so it's not even always within the same structure of government. So it's very, very complicated. NASEO makes it a lot easier to figure that out. In fact, I'll tell you a little bit about this Nationwide Learning Academy class that we've got teed up at prime time. This is going to be awesome. So what we've learned is that the retailers, I mean, I learned this directly from the retailers, is that they really want to figure out how to take advantage of this program.
Right.
And then what I've learned more recently, though, is the manufacturers, they look at it the same way. They want to find out, how can I take advantage? How can I outdo my competitors in this Inflation Reduction Act? I mean, what do I need to know? I don't understand it well enough, and there's 50 states and everything else. So in order to sort of get the retailers to see the manufacturer's perspective and the manufacturers to see the retailer's perspective, we're creating a two-sided panel at prime time where one side will be three manufacturers and one side will be three retailers. And then I'll be moderating it to kind of ask the questions that bring out the answers for each other. So each
Right.
side will learn from the other side, and then everybody will leave there with a much better, idea of what they should do next in terms of their journey along the Inflation Reduction Act path. The other thing is just to let you know is that some of the names I just mentioned earlier, Karen Zelmar and David Terry, will both be invited to be moderating the session with me. And I hope to get one of them there. And if I can't get either one of them there, then everybody's stuck with me as the moderator.
Well, not a bad place to be stuck, that's for sure. And I'm glad you brought it up, the class, because something I'm looking forward to being in the audience for and learning from as well. I have to imagine you may I feel like as you're putting that together, the questions I mean it in a positive connotation. You're a middleman right now between those two conversations, right? With the manufacturers and their perspective and retailers. And so you have a unique seat to probably knowing how those conversations are going to go. Without getting into the secret sauce of that NLA and spoiling things, like how far off do you think the perspectives are when it comes to this program from the manufacturer and the retailer side of things?
I don't think that they're very far off. I think they just need they need some support, or they need
Hmm.
to get the perspective of the other. It's not that they have different perspectives. The manufacturers are wanting to make sure that they have the right product at the right price in the right place.
Hmm.
That's what they're always trying to do. And Inflation Reduction Act creates some changes to that dichotomy, right? So there's now some new considerations that they have to think about. The retailers, on the other hand, it's a similar thing, that they want to understand the program better, because I've been educating on the program at the national level because the states had not applied yet.
Right.
Now that we have some state applications, and I usually don't find out what they actually have in there until after they get approved, because these are private documents, they're not shared. But then as we see what they're planning to do, it helps the retailer figure out what their strategy is. And then that's going to result in product orders. And, that the idea is to help both sides equally, but they're not far. They're looking for each other's support more than they're
Well, that's
at any
good.
odds.
That's a positive sign for sure. And you mentioned those different applications, right? And the fact you've been able to now see a couple. How different are those? Like you mentioned, there could be some differences from state to state. What types of things differ from state to state that you're seeing?
Well, there's several things. One of them is that they don't have to all cover all products. So at the federal level, they list these are the only products that could qualify, but some states are not going to include all the products. Some states are going to do like state of New York, is they're going to include a product like induction cooking, but only if it involves fuel switching. Well,
Right.
that's not everybody's going to have that requirement. In the state of Florida, from having lived there, there's almost nobody that has gas. So if you had a fuel switching requirement in Florida, you'd never sell an induction cooktop because
Right.
everybody has electric there already. I feel like, or one thing I know for a fact is that one of the states that has already applied, so not like I've seen their application, but I heard that they are not going to use the retail channel at all. So this is the state of Minnesota is going to use the contractor channel only. So they're probably going to be more focused on heat pump water heaters and heat pump HVAC units. That's where contractors come into play. That changes everything. So they may not even include heat pump dryers or induction cooking. Well, we know New York State is included. They launched, or they're expecting to launch mainly with induction cooking and heat pump dryer. So the flip opposite of Minnesota. There's also some states, from my understanding, but I don't know which states they are. I think there's several of them in the Northeast that are the program is only gonna apply to low income. So moderate income isn't even gonna be, you have to be less than 80% of the area median income in order to participate in the program. So you start to see, well, I mean, every one of those is a different twist. And every one of those requires, different verifications. And so the federal system, I don't know how it's going to accommodate. If it's doing an income verification, it now has to have 50 sets of rules because some states, moderate income is going to be completely excluded. Some states, it's going to be included. And these are just the things I know of at this point. Who knows how
Right.
many other
Wow.
things are going to come up that are different by state.
It's unreal. It's a lot to keep track of. Do you get a sense that, and this is pure shot in the dark, like, will all of this be like, is DOE doing anything to organize all of this from an informational standpoint, or are you doing it on your lonesome right now?
Well, I'm doing what I can.
Yeah.
Obviously, one person, there's only so much I could do. The DOE would have loved it if every state came back with a similar, sort of program. But it was designed to be the state's money to spend, not the federal
Right.
government's money to spend, which is great because each state has its own personality and desires and everything else. Uh, I think there's people that are kind of holding their breath on how this thing is going to go because on the one hand, they all wanted to get to launch quickly, but then they also wanted to have a lot of controls, but they wanted to be successful. There are many utility programs out there, utility incentive programs that fail because they just can't get any traction. So the thing to note is that some of these are probably going to fail, and that's not that bad because they'll just go back and change the rules a little bit. Remember, the
Right.
program will last another 8 years. So
Hmm.
the money doesn't have to be spent the first year. The idea is to kind of stretch it out.
Right. Right. There's that too, right? You mentioned that was going to be my follow up. Is it's 8 point something billion, right? That's set aside for this.
8.8 billion, yes.
So and when that money's gone, this program dries up. Is that sort of the thought right now?
That is the thought.
Yep.
Yes. Now, the idea was that this is to help spur the transition to electrification.
Yep.
Was, kind of the idea, and whether this is sufficient or not to make that happen, not really sure. We'll see kind of how that goes. Some states are going to limit the amount that gets spent every year, right? Some of them are gonna, so some of them will allow a higher percentage to be spent near the beginning
Hmm.
and then less in future time periods. Some of them are gonna go the other way and want to spread it out equally across the years. So, you have other things. So basically, if a state runs out of money for the year, now you have a whole other thing. Like now you gotta have a reservation system that runs out of sort of coupons when the money runs out so that but if somebody's not using that system and the state runs out of money, that's going to create a whole other scenario because again, the dollar amounts are very big.
Crystal, I almost hesitate to ask this. Crystal ball, do you think this, the money does run out, or do you think it's become so there's so many things and nuances and potential future changes that not that I don't want to call it not a success, because if anything, if any consumer gets a rebate, I think that's a success, right? The fact that there could be just one sale of a product that is a rebate, that receives a rebate or gets approved for, and the retailer gets paid, and would consider that to be a success for a program. But
If it goes to the right, if it
if it
goes to
goes
the right
through,
low
right?
income person, yes.
Exactly. So, but like crystal ball, do you think this program sees that money all get used up, or do you think it's too much of a behemoth to to see that sort of level of rebates, I guess, delivered to the customer or the retailer, really?
What'll happen in all likelihood is some states will dampen the rules a little bit when they launch, and those programs will take off more quickly. And then
Yeah.
the states that put in too many rules will later on come back and start removing the rules or removing some of them. You can't just remove all the rules,
Right.
but remove enough of them to spur the thing to move forward. So the money will end up being spent, and hopefully it'll be spent with the right households, the ones that really are in need. And that's what this is meant to do, is to take
Yeah.
care of people in need. And all of our tax dollars are paying for it. So, I'm okay with it, money going to low income households. So I feel like it will end up going, the money will all be spent for sure. And based on the number of controls I see, I'm hopeful that it will go to the right people. It just
Right.
is it's already taken off way, way slower than originally was anticipated.
Right.
And I see that will continue. It'll be kind of slow, which means it may be more easier to manage that way. Because if it went crazy in one shot, it's probably going to be because there's abuse. Because the thing is, the awareness of the Inflation Reduction Act was much higher in 2022 when it launched.
Right.
Now in 2024, like, I don't know whatever happened to that. Probably it's over by now, is what most people are thinking. So, there's a whole new round of education that's needed to get people to be aware that this thing is even
Yep.
happening in every one of the states.
Yeah. Crazy. Well, so it's a slow churn for sure, and something that I feel like we'll continue to receive updates on, right? Is what kind
There
of
you
what I'm
go.
hearing. So,
There you go.
more
Maybe I should
regular
book the
bookie
next
for the
podcast now.
exactly. We'll put it on the books. We'll stop recording and make that happen. Now, this awesome, right? I think it is cool to get those updates, though. In all seriousness, to see sort of where we're at and what progress has been made, around the programs, around the applications, and where the states are with this, and where you are too, right? See sort of where how big your brain's getting with all this Inflation Reduction Act noise, and no, we appreciate it, and very much looking forward to your NLA, and being, like I said, in the audience for that, and seeing those conversations unfold. I know it's going to be an exciting one, and awesome. And thanks again to Frank for taking the time to chat with us, but really more so, being that expert we can turn to here at Nationwide Marketing Group around this Inflation Reduction Act and how it's going to impact, our members and their consumers and everything. And also, if you're, listening to this within the first week or several weeks of it dropping, very excited to, get to Las Vegas in prime time and, participate and be in the audience for those sessions as they unfold around the Inflation Reduction Act. So still, again, we said it at the top, I feel like a bunch of times, but still so much to learn about and uncover with this Inflation Reduction Act. And Frank is sure to keep us on point around it. So appreciate him for doing all that and chatting with us. And as always, appreciate you listening to the Independent Thinking Podcast. And we'll catch you next time.